In today's video, we are seeing if there is a difference with fruit in your primary fermentation versus your secondary fermentation for mead making. And we're doing it with 15 different fruits. So let's get started. So I'm back with another crazy video. I love these ginormous tests that are kind of absurd. And this is just another one. I wanted to test the differences between fruit in the primary fermentation versus fruit in the secondary fermentation. And I didn't want to just do it a singular video, like one fruit at a time. I amassed 15 different fruits. And I amassed at least 6 pounds of those 15 different fruits. Here are all the fruits that we're putting to the test today. I did have to buy a mixture of frozen and fresh, depending on what was accessible to me. Some stuff was more accessible than others, and obviously frozen was the way to go if it was not very accessible. So we got all of these fruits. I bought 6 pounds of each one. We had a ton of honey, because I had a bucket of honey that I bought. And I did go ahead and attempt to pair yeast with every single mead. So what I did was I took all my fruit, and I looked at what flavor profiles would fit well with the yeast, and I paired out my yeast per fruit. You'll see those on screen now and how I parsed those out. Of course, that is my own opinion, and someone's gonna say, why did you use that yeast on this brew? And it's just what I thought was gonna work well. So that's what I did. So we masked all of these ingredients. So I made 1 gallon of each version. I made basically 30 gallons of mead that started at about 1.080 starting gravity. That's the must base. We split it into 30 containers, buckets and carboys, 1 gallon carboys. And half of them, the carboys in this circumstance, were the ones that were the secondary fermentation fruit, meaning that we fermented it as a traditional mead, and then later on we're gonna add our fruit. So those were all the carboys. We did add the appropriate yeast. We also did some yeast nutrition with this. I did stagger my nutrient with all of them. So that's where all the carboys came from. Then there was the buckets, and that's where I added all the fruit in the primary. So the other half of my 30 gallons of must, I put each fruit in there. And I did put a pectic enzyme when I added my yeast. I didn't do like a precursorial, that's not the right word, addition of pectic enzyme. We added all of the fruits into each bucket. We added all of the must in. We added all the yeast, and we just let that start going. That's our primary fermentation version. We, of course, added our fermento, did some staggered nutrients, as you'll see with some B-roll. So I did have to, every day, basically go through and punch the cap on all the fruit that was in primary. And so that literally I just opened it up and gently punched it back down to make sure there was no chance of mold or bacteria or anything like that. These ones that were just a traditional mead, fruit and secondary, obviously they just did their thing. They were easy going. It was about 2 weeks on the fruit, and I tried to make these matched so it was fair. So 2 weeks of fermentation went by, and all of them on the fruit version were done. So, and all of them on the traditional side were done. So we went ahead and we did some racking. We racked all of these brews into new containers. The fruited ones were racked into new containers, i.e. glass carboys. And we went ahead and stabilized them so that they were halted, no possible further fermentation to occur. We took gravity readings. All of them ended at 1.000 on the fruited side. On the secondary side, all of the traditional meads here also ended at 1.000. We did not halt the fermentation in this circumstance because we wanted there to be a little more fermentation on the fruit we're gonna add to make it totally fair. The secondary versions, I had done a big old swap in my buckets, were now available. I put all my fruit into those buckets again. We racked the traditional mead versions onto the fruit with all the appropriate yeast and all those things. and we let those set. So now we have these primary versions in the carboys, and we have the secondary versions in the buckets with the fruit. I wanted the same amount of fruit exposure or time. So the secondary fruit got 2 weeks of exposure. I did, again, lightly punch the cap with all of these so that they would stay submerged, no bad bacteria, but let fermentation continue on. Once the secondary fermentation ones had gone for 2 weeks, we went ahead and racked those into new containers, and we stabilized them at that point. They had all been sitting, this whole process has been about a little over a month. All are stabilized, all have been fruited in different capacities. I wanted to let them age for a little bit of time, and then we backsweetened them all to roughly 1.020 final gravity. So I just went through and I added honey to each one, and I did a force clearing agent of sparkaloid on all of them as well so that I could have them all be clear as possible. We're about 45, 50 days into this process now. They're all backsweetened and they're all clear, and we went ahead and bottled them. You'll see all the B-roll of bottling them. We did a primary label, of course, for the primaries, secondary label for the secondaries, and this experiment is ready to be tasted. I finished up the bottling of these 9 months ago, 10 months ago from when I'm recording this, and tomorrow I am doing my tasting to get tasting notes for this. I did have a tasting opportunity at Mead Stampede this year, and I didn't get any tasting notes. I just let people experience it, and it was quite fun. This test has been huge, and it's all thanks to these people, or these are some people who helped support this. They covered about half the cost of this video, of this test, and I do not anticipate breaking even at all. This was about an $800 video to produce, and thankfully those people were supportive to me. So thank you to those people, and thank you to my patrons and YouTube members for making this possible. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do it. I'm still going in the negative, but it's less of a negative? I don't know. Enough of me talking about how this worked. Let's talk about the test results. I'm gonna come back after we've done our tasting, and we're gonna talk about the results. All right, here we are for the final notes portion you've been waiting for. I had 6 tasters come through and help me with this tasting, and including myself. And so thank you to these people who helped me. They sat down and tasted the primary versus secondary, and then they filled out a Google form, which included, a little slot for the primary tasting notes they filled out, of course, and then secondary. And then they also did a preference choice. So they voted on whether they preferred the primary or secondary. So once they had finished the tasting, I went ahead and started to compile these notes into a couple different things. So I'm gonna chunk out this last section like this. I'm gonna give you links to all my information below, to the Google Sheet with all of their raw data, to another Google Sheet that has the composite notes from each one in a easier way to read. And then I have some other documents that will further help you. Everything will be down below in the description if you prefer to just read instead of hear me talk about it. So I sort of expected primary to present more like wine with higher tannin, maybe less of like a bright fruit characteristic because of fermentation. And then I maybe expected secondary to be the opposite. And surprisingly, I don't know if that's true. So let's talk about this. I'm gonna put on screen the composite tasting notes between primary and secondary for each fruit, so you can pause and read them if you'd like to. And then we'll talk about I have a shorter little comparison between the two. And then some more information. Starting alphabetically, let's start with apples. So you just saw the tasting notes of the composite, primary and secondary on there. Here's a comparison that I kind of drew between the two. The primary fermentation was bright and floral with pronounced honey and apple aroma, while the secondary lost intensity and acidity, becoming smoother, but less expressive. Tasters strongly preferred the secondary version, valuing it despite its balance of lower aroma. So of our 6 tasters, all 6 chose the secondary for apples, which I found quite interesting. Here is the banana. The primary fermentation for banana showed herbal and tropical banana notes with a full mouthfeel, while the secondary became thinner with mild banana skin tones. Voters preferred the primary for its richness and aromatic presence. 6 people voted, or all 6 of us voted, for the primary fermentation for bananas. Blackberry. In primary, strong berry flavors overshadowed the honey, while secondary softened into a more floral, honey-forward profile. The majority preferred the secondary, appreciating its smoother and better balanced taste. So this was a little different. There were 2 votes for the primary and 4 votes for the secondary. So mostly people liked the secondary for blackberries. Now we're going on to blueberries. For blueberry, the primary was medium berry with muted honey. Secondary flipped that balance, offering a bright honey aroma and subdued berry note. Tasters leaned toward the secondary, citing improved brightness and harmony. So this one I only had 5 votes for some reason, and all 5 of the votes went to the secondary. Next up is cherry. For the cherry, primary fermentation was vibrant and tart with clear cherry character, while secondary deepened the color and texture, creating a rounder, smoother profile. The primary earned more votes, likely for its fresh fruit sharpness and liveliness. 5 votes went to the primary, 1 vote went to the secondary. Guava is next. For guava, the comparison notes are: primary had earthy honey depth and lush tropical floral aroma, while secondary lightened toward floral honey sweetness with less tropical punch. The primary edged out the secondary for its fuller tropical expression. 4 people voted for the primary, 2 voted for the secondary. Going on to kiwi. The kiwi notes were: primary offered zesty citrus and tart energy, while the secondary mellowed to a gentler floral honey mix. Voters leaned toward the primary for its brightness and crisp balance. 4 people voted for the primary, 2 voted for the secondary. Next up is mango. Mango says the primary showcased soft mango aroma backed by honey, whereas the secondary turned honey dominant with subtler fruit tones. The secondary was preferred for its smooth honey-led sweetness. 2 people voted for the primary and 4 voted for the secondary. Next up we have papaya. The notes are: primary carried mild tropical aroma and balanced sweetness. Secondary became more honey-rich and less fruity. Tasters preferred the primary for its fruit presence and complexity. 5 people voted for the primary, 1 person voted for the secondary. For the peach. For peach, we have primary was juicy and aromatic, while secondary leaned smoother and rounder with reduced fruit brightness. The primary won out for its freshness and lively peach character. So 4 voted for the primary for peach and 2 for the secondary. We're on to pear. For the pear, primary presented crisp acidity with bright pear aroma, while secondary became cleaner and softer, emphasizing honey tones. The primary prevailed for its refreshing vibrancy. 4 people voted for the primary, 2 voted for the secondary. Next up is pineapple. The primary was sharp and tart with tropical intensity, while secondary softened to a honey-dominant nose and gentler acidity. The secondary swept the votes for its balance, and smoother integration. So 0 people voted for the primary, all 6 of us voted for the secondary for pineapple. Next up is plum. The primary was delicate with floral honey notes, whereas secondary gained stronger sweet tart plum and fuller body. The primary still led in votes for its subtle elegance and lighter touch. 4 people voted for the primary and 2 voted for the secondary. We're on to our final 2. Here's the raspberry. The raspberry notes. Primary had mellow berry with floral honey aroma, while secondary sharpened a dried fruit tone. Tasters leaned toward the primary for its smoothness and integrated sweetness. 4 people voted for the primary, 2 voted for the secondary. And last but not least is the strawberry. For our strawberry, the primary showed strong strawberry and honey florals, while secondary was sweeter but lighter. Votes were split for this one, suggesting equal appeal for bold fruit and soft honey profile. So this was 3-3 for our voting. So here's a composite of all the preferences, primary versus secondary. I don't know that this is a great way to say you only should introduce your fruit in the primary or secondary, because I think there's a pro of actually doing both. What we noticed with a lot of these tastings was you got more of that brighter, nice, fresh, fruity aroma, or taste, in the primary, and then you got maybe more of a subtle fruit thing in the secondary, but you also had a good balance of your honey profile within that. I think there's something to be said about a mixture. Obviously, that's optimal, but it requires more work. So now let's talk about the trends that we've seen between these. And of course, I'll put notes down to this stuff below. So for the primary fermentation, a general trend we saw was a general flavor pattern. The primary fermentations consistently highlight brighter, more fruit-forward aromas with higher acidity and crisp freshness. The honey base tends to play a supporting role, often described as subtle, floral, or background sweetness rather than dominant. The aromas, most primaries have strong aromatic lift, especially citrus, berry, and floral notes with more volatile esters present before secondary mellowing. This phase captures each fruit's distinct signature aroma: apple floral crispness, bananas herbal sweetness, cherries tart liveliness, etc. For texture, mouthfeel, tannin, primary batches are generally lighter and with brighter acid structure. Tasters often notice sharper, zesty edges or leaner body before the mellowing and rounding effects of secondary fermentation. The preference trends for our tasters. While secondary fermentation frequently scored slightly higher overall, a large portion of tasters preferred primary versions when fruit intensity, tartness, and freshness stood out: banana, cherry, peach, pear, guava, kiwi. This suggests that tasters valued fruit clarity and vibrancy overall over smoothness in several cases. So a little summary. In short, primary fermentations express the purest, air quotes around that, fruit character and natural acidity, more vivid, aromatic, and crisp, but sometimes at the cost of balance and integration. These are some snapshot stages of the fruit's identity before the secondary fermentation softens and blends the flavors into a rounder, honey forward profile. For our secondary fermentation, here's some commonalities we saw between all of them. The secondary fermentation almost universally shows a shift from fruit-dominant to honey-dominant character. The intensity of the fruit aroma softens while honey floral and smooth sweetness become more prominent, producing a rounder and more cohesive overall flavor. For our aroma and integration of that, aromas lose some of their high notes but gain depth and warmth. Fruits like blueberry, mango, and pineapple become notably more honey-forward with reduced sharpness. This stage often introduces balance and integration, smoothing out the acidity and creating a more uniform sensory profile. For our texture, mouthfeel, tannin, secondary batches consistently develop a fuller body and smoother mouthfeel, described as creamier, softer, less acidic. The perceived acidity drops and the carbonation or brightness gives way to viscous, polished textures, emphasizing roundness over zest. our taster preference trends, secondary fermentations were favored in many cases. Apples, blackberry, blueberry, mango, pineapple, particularly where the primary version had excess acidity or sharp fruit edges. Tasters appreciated the approachability, balance, and smooth sweetness that secondary again brought, suggesting that maturation improved drinkability even when it reduced fruit brightness. The summary for this is, overall, secondary fermentations are the stage where each mead evolves from bright and raw to refined and cohesive, showcasing mellow acidity, integrated honey tones, and smoother mouthfeel. The fruit identity becomes subtler, but the beverage gains roundness and crowd-pleasing drinkability. Now here's taking all of that, going further down, here's a chart that I'm gonna try and put out. Now I wanna be really specific when I say that these results are very specific to the fruit that I bought, the time I bought the fruit, the honey I used, and all of those integrations. I think that there is still a lot of room for some of these notes, a lot of these notes to be true of the other. While we saw a lot of brightness, acidity, that more true fruit character popping up in the primary, that doesn't mean that the secondary can't also have those characteristics. It is so fruit dependent. It is so dependent on so many variables. So for this test, these are the results we saw. I had my great 5 tasters and myself go through and taste all these, and I think that they did a fantastic job compiling notes. I also had a bunch of tasters at Mead Stampede 2025, but they didn't give me notes. I just let them experience the primary, secondary, so unfortunately I don't have any tasting from that. There's probably 20 or 30 people who got to try it there, but it was not a great place for note taking. I'll say that. Huge video. This video has been really fun. I'm gonna put all that information below, all the Google Docs, all the Google Sheets, and compile things as best I can. I would love to know your opinions. Do you agree with what has been said, or do you feel like maybe there's something else? Maybe you've had a different experience. Part of this whole video is for me to give you my experience, and for you guys to give me your experience, so we can compile further data and hopefully all grow as mead makers. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Huge, huge, huge thanks to all of these guys and girls who supported the channel by donating to this project. This project was massively expensive, and I would not have been able to do this without the help of those people. So huge thank you to them, and huge thank you to my patrons, YouTube members, who helped me cover this other half of this, essentially. This video is quite expensive, but it is well worth the data, and I hope that you've enjoyed it and maybe learned something. Let me know about your comments below. If you'd like to support the channel, find the links. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in a future video. Cheers.